The story begins when a brave adventurer named Ront Faina enters a labyrinth. His mouth nearly gapes open as he faces a terrifying winged monster with visibly powerful arm muscles. The creature looks incredibly strong, with a mouth inside another mouth that looks horrifying as it roars. Ront has never felt this scared in his entire life and realizes he won't survive this encounter. The giant monster, resembling a Digimon, approaches our hero, making Ront tremble in disbelief that this is happening to him. He dreamed of becoming a mithril-class adventurer, but that goal now seems much harder as the monster bites him with both of its mouths. Sometime later, Ront is shocked to find himself still alive, but that shock pales in comparison to the horror he feels upon seeing that he is now nothing but bones. Disbelief shakes him to his hollow core, and he screams in terror at what has happened to him. A flashback shows a time when Ront still had flesh and organs. Back then, he had no idea what awaited him, so he began his day as an adventurer with great optimism. Early in the morning, as was typical for adventurers, he thought about how lucky nobles and scholars were to sleep in. But waking up early was the least of his problems. He explains that he was a low-ranking bronze-class adventurer, born and raised in a small town not even on the map, and now he was off to take a job from the Adventurers Guild. Jobs were assigned based on an adventurer's rank and skills, likely to prevent foolish adventurers from messing up and dying or turning into undead skeletons. There were plenty of jobs, from hunting down cool monsters to gathering boring materials. Some nerdy-looking people called out to Ront, and he explained that he was heading back to the labyrinth since there were no good jobs available. These lazy folks didn't understand how Ront could work so hard, then ran off to play Fortnite. Ront explains that while many adventurers prefer to form parties, he remains a solo adventurer, not for cool reasons like wearing an eye patch, but simply because he isn't that skilled. He's been an adventurer for 10 years but is still stuck at bronze, the second lowest rank. He survives by carefully selecting jobs and selling the rewards, living frugally and simply. But he really messed up when he entered the labyrinth that would change him forever. In this long explored and abandoned labyrinth, Ront is surprised to find a hidden passage. This is an incredible discovery, as he might be the first person to ever find it. Without hesitation, he begins exploring. The deeper he goes, the more certain he becomes that this place is untouched, and he hopes to find valuable magical weapons. Ront is excited. Just reporting this discovery to the guild could earn him a fortune. But he's too foolish to notice the obvious signs of danger, and soon he arrives in the room where he meets his demise. Once again, we see him face the creature he calls a dragon, the mightiest monster of legend. This dragon appears to have evolved into its final form, exuding a terrifying pressure that freezes Ront in place, making him realize he stands no chance against the dragon Manon. Back in the present, Ront wonders how he's still alive after being devoured. A shocking reality hits him. He is now just a skeleton, likely an undead monster known as an undead. It sounds cool, but priests or bishops could easily destroy him with purification magic, as undead aren't supposed to exist in this world. Ront does a lot of thinking for someone without a brain, questioning whether he's truly dead. He's still conscious and has memories, so he must be alive to some extent. Unable to answer this existential question, Ront decides to return to town, but quickly realizes that would only bring trouble. He'd be captured and possibly executed. Ront doesn't want to die again, but he confuses himself further by questioning his existence once more. Eventually, he decides to ignore all his problems and leave the room as fast as possible. As he exits, Ront explains the mystery of labyrinths. No one knows where they come from or how they function. There are many labyrinths across the world, filled with treasure, but monsters lurk around every corner. Everyone is busy with newly discovered labyrinths, but solo adventurers should be arriving at this one in a few days. Ront plans to ask them for advice about his condition, but he realizes he must first learn to speak without a tongue. Suddenly, a skeleton monster appears, and Ront prepares to fight his skeletal counterpart. He struggles to move properly, likely because he lacks muscles or other things living people have. As a human, he was weak, but now, he's even worse. He used to defeat skeletons easily, but now he can't even lift his sword without falling over. Ront panics at how vulnerable he is, but the skeleton turns out to be even weaker than him. Ront realizes he can't use advanced sword techniques since he's just floating bones, but he remembers he can use spirit energy. Fortunately, it still works despite him no longer being human, so he uses it to enhance his physical abilities. With increased attack power, Ront shatters his opponent's skull, but is shocked when the creature begins to glow. He realizes he's recovering the spirit energy he just used and wonders what's happening. A flashback shows a woman, Lorraine Vivi, teaching Ront about monsters. They have mysterious traits. Given time and experience, they evolve into greater beings. This also applies to humans who train and grow, but monsters take it to the extreme. Lorraine uses skeletons as an example. Normally, they stay as skeletons, but sometimes they evolve into ghouls, an existential evolution. Ront gets an idea. Ghouls are also undead, but they resemble humans because they have flesh. If he can become a ghoul, he'll just need a robe and mask to return to town without scaring people. Ront finds new optimism. His new goal is to defeat monsters in the labyrinth to evolve into a ghoul. Back in town, Ront's friend Lorraine Vivi is disappointed that he hasn't shown up, so she cooks dinner for herself. Meanwhile, in the labyrinth, Ront works hard, having already defeated 5 skeletons. He's regaining mobility and learns that the light from defeated enemies heals him, allowing him to use spirit energy in every battle. Ront decides to seek stronger monsters and encounters a slime. Though considered weak, slimes shouldn't be underestimated, as physical attacks are less effective. Ront can't use offensive magic, only lighting a small flame, which isn't useful in battle, so he decides to attack with his sword. There are 2 ways to defeat a slime: pierce its core or destroy it until it can't regenerate. After dodging the slime's attack, Ront counterattacks and is surprised when he succeeds. He concludes he got lucky by hitting the slime's core but doesn't question his victory, taking the magic stone as a reward. He also collects slime mucus to sell later, as it's used in cosmetics to make people look less ugly. At the guild, 2 people discuss a rookie named Rena Rupage looking for a party to join. They would have recommended Ront, but he's missing. Since Rena needs money, the guild members suggest she head to an easy labyrinth to search for treasure and materials. Unbeknownst to her, it's the same labyrinth where Ront is. In the labyrinth, Ront notes that he no longer feels sleepy or hungry, which is good, since anything he eats would probably fall through his bones. He fights endlessly, but existential evolution takes time. His physical abilities have recovered, and he can now use mana. Most surprisingly, he can still use holy magic despite being undead. Besides healing wounds and curing illnesses, holy magic can purify water and delay food decay. Ront uses it to make bread last 3 more days, wishing he had a normal body that could eat it later. For now, he focuses on his goal and considers how many monsters he can fight at once. Being cautious, he decides to flee if he encounters more than 4. In this low-level labyrinth, he shouldn't face more than 5, but if he does, it'll be the end for him. Ront feels insecure about his weakness despite 10 years as an adventurer and 20 years of training. He has spirit energy, mana, and holy magic, a rare combination even among high-ranking adventurers, but he wishes he had one overwhelming strength. Normally, someone as untalented as him would quit, but Ront trains relentlessly every day to achieve his dream of becoming a mithril-class adventurer, the highest rank even prodigies struggle to reach. Mithril-class adventurers can save entire nations. Ront is determined to get there, and being a skeleton won't stop him. Ront starts defeating more skeletons and wonders if he's stronger than when he was human. He easily defeats another slime, confident he's growing stronger. He collects more slime mucus but stops when the emitted light changes. His body begins transforming. Muscles form, hair grows on his head, followed by skin and eyes. The process completes, and he manages to let out a growl. Ront has evolved into a ghoul, his body resembling a creepy, dried-up corpse, but he's thrilled to have flesh again. This is a major step in the right direction. Most importantly, if he keeps working hard, Ront believes he can evolve into a higher-ranked undead, perhaps even a vampire. With flesh now covering him, Ront tries his voice, but only a growl comes out. Happy to make any sound, he tries again, managing to say, "Hello," and "Good morning," though his voice sounds like a terrifying zombie. He knows he'll need practice. Then, Ront fought against a dangerous, fat goblin among a large group. As a ghoul, he now had muscles and was more agile than when he was just bones. Surprisingly, his mana, spiritual energy, and purity had also increased. Ront was now stronger, possibly even surpassing his strength as a human. He used his power to reinforce his sword, beheaded the goblin, and wondered if he was now stronger than before. Suddenly, Ront heard the sound of battle and spotted Rena Rupage, a girl from the guild, effortlessly defeating weak skeletons. Ront was happy to see a human after so long but stopped himself from approaching her because he was a terrifying ghoul with skin barely clinging to his body. If he got too close, Rena would surely attack or flee. Ront decided to observe her from a distance like a half-dead scout and realized he had never seen her before. He was certain Rena was a beginner since he knew almost every adventurer in town. Adventurers could be a tough crowd, often mocking weaklings like Ront, so he was familiar with their skills and companions. Ront continued following Rina like a stalker and watched her fight another skeleton. He could see that Rina was well trained but still weak, needing multiple strikes to finish it off. Ront knew Rina was waiting for the right moment to attack but wasn't paying attention to her surroundings. This proved to be a fatal mistake as she got cornered against a wall. Rina showed her determination as a true adventurer by fighting back, but the skeleton was too strong. With no other choice, Ront rushed in to save her. Rina was shocked to see a terrifying ghoul. Ront hoped Rina would attack the skeleton while he distracted it, but the girl wasn't much help. Ront sliced the skeleton in half and checked on Rina. Unfortunately, his voice still sounded like a zombie, frightening her when he tried to say her name. Ront explained that he wasn't an enemy by dropping his sword. Rina realized Ront was trying to speak and introduced himself as Ront Faina, an adventurer. Rina wondered if he was wearing a costume. Ront couldn't explain that he had died but was still alive. Rina could tell Ront was different from other monsters and thanked him for saving her. Ront reassured the frightened girl that he wouldn't harm her but asked for her help. Rina agreed to buy him a robe so he could return to town, letting him keep the change. She introduced herself as Rina Rupage, the daughter of a knight, and promised to do this as repayment for Ront saving her. Rina left, but Ront noticed how wary she was of him. A true adventurer would report a mysterious ghoul like him to the guild, but Ront trusted that Rina, whom he had just met, wouldn't betray him. In town, the first thing Rina did was rush to the guild. Sheila Ebars, a guild clerk, was worried about Rina, who said she had an urgent question. Meanwhile, in the labyrinth, Ront fought slimes again and confirmed he was far stronger than when he was human. His body now moved exactly as he wanted. He destroyed another slime by perfectly striking its core and wondered if his vision had improved. He suspected it was battle intuition, something that couldn't be learned through training or study. Ront couldn't help but feel the irony that he had finally gained the power he always wanted only after becoming a rotting corpse. Suddenly, Ront was surprised to see Rina return. He reassured her that he wasn't another ghoul, explaining that ghouls didn't appear in beginner-level areas like this. Rina noticed Ront's speech had improved, and he explained that he had been practicing. Rina brought clothes but was startled when she tried to give him the change. She apologized for still being afraid of Ront, who looked like something out of a thriller video, but said she'd get used to it. Ront praised Rina's clothing choice. The robe covered his entire body, perfect for a mage. Rina also brought boots, gloves, and bandages to cover Ront's arms and legs. Her kindness almost made Ront want to cry, but his rotting body had no tears. Ront put everything on and looked decent enough. The robe was easier to wear than he expected, though it slightly obstructed his vision. He could still fight, so he told Rina everything was perfect. Rina accidentally revealed Ront's ghastly face but then showed she had brought a mask. She knew his face was hard to look at, so she bought him one. The mask clung to Ront's face as if knowing it needed to stay hidden, and Ront was shocked to find he couldn't remove it. Both panicked, and Rina explained that the shop where she bought it seemed suspicious, not the one her friend had recommended. The mask only cost 3 copper coins, but Rina had checked it and found no curse. Ront suspected the mask had a curse that activated upon wearing it. Rina was surprised Ront could use holy energy and wondered if stronger purity could break the curse. Unfortunately, he had run out of energy. He tried to comfort Rina but stepped back, remembering he was a monster. Rina stopped him, realizing Ront wasn't a bad person. She said she wasn't afraid anymore, though she was still trembling. Ront told Rina she didn't have to force herself and could take time to adjust to a rotting zombie like him. Rina promised it wouldn't take long, and they headed to town. On the way, Rina explained that there were no jobs for beginners like her in the capital, so she had come to Malt. Ront was surprised she had come to the countryside, but Rina said she wanted to see the world and become a true adventurer quickly. Ront suggested she be more cautious like him since everyone only had one life. Rina agreed, and Ront joked that zombies like him were rare, making them laugh. In Malt, Ront pointed out that many people knew him, so they'd realize something was wrong if he showed his ID. They chose another gate, and Ront thanked Rina. Without her help, he wouldn't have come this far. Rina said it was no big deal, but Ront explained that as a monster, helping him enter town could brand Rina a criminal, even costing her adventurer's license. Rina was determined. Without Ront, she would have died to that skeleton, so she didn't mind risking her life this once. At the western gate, their adventurer identities were confirmed, but a guard grew suspicious of Ront's strange appearance. Tension rose when they asked to see his face. Rina cleverly explained that Ront's mask was cursed and couldn't be removed. She said his voice was damaged from severe monster-inflicted wounds, and Ront showed his mutilated ear as proof. Rena claimed Ront had bought the mask to hide his scars, only to find it cursed. The guard took pity and tried removing the mask but failed, allowing Ront to enter. Ront praised Rena for their success, but she said it was part of her repayment. Suddenly, Ront vanished. He watched as a panicked Rena searched for him, thinking about how kind she was. Her equipment was cheap but well maintained, she was a decent fighter, and brave enough. Ront was sure Rena would become a great adventurer. He mused that talented people like her usually left him behind. He had to leave Rena for now but promised to apologize properly once he looked more human. Later, we see why Ront left Rena. He went to meet a more suitable human collaborator, someone with a shared past who could be trusted with his secret, Lorraine Vivi. Ront entered Lorraine's house and tried waking her with his raspy voice, but she refused. Ront threatened to drop a book on her head, making Lorraine realize it was him, but she was shocked to see him covered in robes. Without warning, Rent revealed his ghoul arm. The flashback shows Lorraine worrying about Ront and considering asking the guild to send a search party. When Ront knocks on the door, Lorraine wonders why he doesn't just come in. Lorraine Vivi suspected something must have happened to Ront Faina, so she pretended to sleep when he entered. Deep down, she was relieved to know Ront was still alive. Returning to the present, Lorraine explains that after years of research, she has never heard of anyone being devoured by a dragon and turning into an undead. She is skeptical of Ront's story, but seeing his horrifying body, she has no choice but to believe him. Ront is amazed at how calm Lorraine is, though it's to be expected from an academic sorceress and adventurer. However, it's clear Lorraine now sees him more as a research subject than a friend. Lorraine surprises Ront by asking if he is truly still Ront now that he's undead. Ront explains that he definitely has Ront's memories and thoughts, but his ruined body is clearly dead. Whether he's the same person as before, however, he doesn't know. Setting aside this impossible question, Ront says he wants to remain an adventurer. Even with a rotting corpse-like body, he is determined to reach Mithril class no matter what. Lorraine, being a genius, can see that Ront wants her to accept jobs for him since he can't go to the guild in his current state. He also can't stay at an inn, so Lorraine offers him lodging at her place. In exchange, Ront will assist in her research. He's invaluable since no one has studied a monster capable of existential evolution. Ront agrees on the condition that Lorraine doesn't try to dissect him. The next day, Lorraine directly pays Ront for the magic stones and slime mucus he collected in the labyrinth, cutting out the guild as a middleman. The payment is substantial since Ront always brings high-quality materials. Ront decides to visit the blacksmith, feeling pleased with his full coin pouch, but his happiness fades when he notices people seem afraid of him. At the smithy, Ront apologizes for his strange appearance in a hoarse voice. He orders a new sword, and the blacksmith, named Clope, can tell from his old blade that Ront uses either magic or spiritual energy. Ront surprises him by revealing he uses magic, spiritual energy, and divine power. Clope says the ability to wield all three is extremely rare, and Ront is only the second person with that ability to visit his shop. Ront asks him to keep it a secret, and Clope agrees, as discretion is part of a blacksmith's job. Clope takes pride in his work, and the sword will be ready in a few days, requiring some discussions with Ront during the process. Back at home, Lorraine researches ghouls. They possess great physical strength and can survive even if decapitated. They crave animal flesh, especially human. There are cases of powerful monsters turning humans into low-level undead, but the victims usually lose their personality, will, and human emotions. Ront is an exceptional case, and Lorraine concludes the chances of him being exactly the same as when he was alive are slim. Still, as a close friend, she feels Ront is still himself. A flashback shows their first meeting, back when Ront's skin hadn't peeled off. Lorraine had just taken a job, and someone asked her to take Ront, then a rookie, along without pay since he needed experience. Lorraine explains that the world feels dull to her, even after becoming the youngest person to earn the title of Grand Scholar, which allowed her to register as a silver-class adventurer. She traveled to distant lands without telling anyone simply because nothing else interested her. On that job, Lorraine decided to bring Ront, who was tasked with carrying her bags. She noticed how carefully he harvested certain plants and was annoyed when she saw him picking many on his own. She was about to scold him, assuming he didn't understand the delicate process, but was shocked to see him do it perfectly. Suddenly, a mischievous goblin appeared, and Ront told Lorraine to use a specific spell. She complied, and Ront was amazed by her far superior silver-class magic. The next morning, Lorraine admitted it wasn't her first fight, she was just nervous since she usually had bodyguards. She then realized something, and Ront confessed that everyone was worried about Lorraine going alone, so they sent him along. Someone had once advised Ront to read as much as possible about plants and monsters, and he had done so. Lorraine asked him to teach her, also because Rond knew how to navigate forests. Rond agreed, and thus their relationship began. For 10 years, Rond worked hard every day to reach Mithril class, while Lorraine stayed by his side, pursuing the research she loved. Back at the smithy, Rond thanks Clope for the sword and shakes his hand carefully. Clope gives him a temporary blade that can channel magic and spiritual energy. Clope can tell Rond is in trouble and wonders why he won't ask for help. He suspects Rond is under a terrible curse that might affect their shop. Rond never wanted to burden others, so he hid his identity. However, his ability to wield all types of power and his living arrangement with Lorraine made Clope realize who he was. Later, Rond and Lorraine enjoy a meal prepared by the chef Gordon. Rond doesn't eat since he isn't hungry, but Lorraine explains that Rond is clearly different from other ghouls, likely due to his existential evolution. She wonders what Rond will become next, but Rond doesn't know. He wants to remain as human-like as possible, so his next step is to evolve again, meaning returning to the labyrinth to fight monsters and grow stronger. In the labyrinth, a man is attacked by a slime, and Rond arrives just in time to save him. The man, named Loris, thanks him, having only suffered a scratch. Rond quickly leaves, thinking adventurers should be responsible for themselves. There's no obligation to help others, and if they die, it's their own fault. Some even fake distress to rob helpful adventurers. Still, Rond always helps when he can. Loris, impressed by Rond's strength, begs to join him. He explains that he just registered as an adventurer but is actually a chef whose restaurant is drowning in 15 gold coins of debt, due next week. As a desperate rookie, he's willing to do anything, but no one gives him a chance. That's why he came to this labyrinth, which is said to be manageable alone. Rond thinks that only applies to strong adventurers and initially refuses. But as he walks away, he feels too harsh and allows Loris to tag along. Loris calls Rond reliable, but Rond notices Loris' wound. Sometimes, he fears he's no longer himself. Rond takes Loris to the hidden entrance where he became undead but is disappointed to find the dragon gone. There are no magic items, but they discover another hidden passage. Loris suggests reporting it to the guild for a reward but quickly adds that Rond should take the credit. Rond says he doesn't care for glory and tells Loris to claim it. In the passage, they find an empty room, so Loris insists on searching for treasure. Suddenly, a magic circle appears on the floor, and Rond tries to stop Loris from running toward it. Loris, suddenly confident, says it's fine since there are no monsters. Rond realizes Loris can't see the magic circle, but it's too late. Loris is teleported away. There's no telling where he went, but it's likely a floor swarming with monsters or deadly traps. The smart move would be to leave him, but Rent feels that would make him a true monster. Reluctantly, he follows Loris through the teleportation circle. There, Rent finds Loris unconscious and a giant skeleton. He realizes this is a boss room and prepares to fight the colossal monster. Rond strengthened himself to attack, but it was ineffective. He realized the giant skeleton couldn't be harmed by spiritual energy, so he tried magic, but that also failed. The exit had disappeared, meaning this was a room that couldn't be left until the boss was defeated. Rond, an adventurer who never gave up, tried something else. His sword might not hold up, but since the skeleton was undead, holy power should work. A holy powered strike succeeded, and the skeleton crumbled. Rond followed up with a holy attack to its skull, ending the battle. He patched up Loris, who was shocked that Rond had defeated the giant skeleton. Rond picked up the giant magic stone, which proved the monster had been extremely strong. Loris was impressed by Rond and offered him the magic stone. Rond wanted compensation. He showed his disfigured skin, simply said he'd been attacked by a monster, and asked Loris to run errands for him at the shop and guild. The deal seemed unfair, so Rond demanded free food and drinks at Loris's restaurant anytime. Loris called it a silly question because he would obviously allow Rond to eat for free. His restaurant wouldn't have stayed open without Rond's help. Loris couldn't see magic circles like Rond, so Rond told him to walk to the door to go home. Rond wanted to keep exploring but decided to wait for another time. Loris took Rond to his restaurant, where his wife, Laura Satie, was relieved to see him safe. Laura worried her husband had been tricked again when she saw the giant magic stone, but Loris explained that although Rond looked like a shady figure, he was a great person. Loris finally introduced himself, and they thanked Rond. Rond hesitated to give his name, but Loris promised not to tell anyone. Rond gave his name, and Loris promised him hot meals anytime he wanted. As Rond left, something strange happened to him. He wished Loris had been a loner with no family because there was something he wanted to test, and he'd have preferred to test it on a bad person. Rond didn't want to get close to Loris, which was why he'd never asked his name. Rond began repeating the name, Lorraine, over and over, and grew alarmed as something started taking over his body. Ront returned home but barely responded when Lorraine tried to talk to him. She asked if he was okay, and Ront only said he was happy. Suddenly, Ront hugged her, making her wonder if he was drunk. Clearly, something was wrong, and Ront shocked her by biting her neck. Lorraine pushed him away, and the monster, like Ront, said it was delicious. Lorraine could see the real Ront was still inside, so she beat him unconscious. She let him sleep for now, waiting for an apology when he woke up. Lorraine would have preferred Ront to hug her while conscious. She'd gladly let him eat her anytime. When he woke up, Ront no longer felt controlled and apologized. Lorraine dismissed it as an accident and just wanted to know what he remembered. Ront recalled meeting a man in the labyrinth and finding him delicious, just like Lorraine, so he couldn't control himself. Lorraine wasn't surprised, as ghouls craved human flesh and blood. She decided they needed rest, but Ront insisted on checking the wound he'd made. Lorraine had sold all her potions, so they'd have to wait until morning to treat it. Ront wasn't satisfied and healed Lorraine with holy power. Lorraine was amazed at how much holy power Ront could wield, admitting she'd never been healed by holy power before. She was stunned when all the pain vanished, and Ront even erased the scar. Lorraine realized Ront's body had changed. He could now disguise his once grotesque form as old scars. Ront's mask had somehow reshaped itself, so he still had to hide his face. The mask changed again, and Ront wondered if it responded to his desires. He could control his transformations but still couldn't remove the mask. Lorraine couldn't remove it either, but it didn't matter since Ront still needed to conceal his face. He could also speak more clearly, leading him to suspect he had undergone another existential evolution. This made sense since he had defeated a strong monster, but strangely, he hadn't evolved immediately after the battle like before. Lorraine thought it over and guessed Ront had evolved from consuming her flesh and blood. This made more sense, as he now resembled less of a ghoul and more of a ghast, a vampire's servant, weaker than even the lowest vampire. Ront wondered why his transformation was heading in this direction, and Lorraine said the origins of existential evolution were a mystery, even to the most knowledgeable scholars. Ront wanted to hear Lorraine's hypotheses, so they decided to stay up. Ront had started as a skeleton, then became a ghoul. Existential evolution was when a monster transformed into a stronger being. Ghouls weren't the only stronger form after skeletons. There were also skeleton warriors, skeleton knights, and others. Why evolution led down one path over another was unknown, but Lorraine speculated monsters evolved into forms they desired. Ront kept saying he wanted to be more human, so he became a ghoul. Ront thought it would make more sense if he became a vampire, which was closer to human. Lorraine compared existential evolution to guild ranks. You couldn't jump from bronze to gold. She predicted Ront would need to meet certain conditions to become a vampire. Experiments on small monsters showed they evolved into forms suited to their environment. In volcanic areas, they developed high fire affinity, near water, high water affinity. From this, Ront wondered if he could become a vampire someday if he worked hard, maybe even return to being human. Lorraine predicted further evolution wouldn't just involve defeating monsters. Just as he became a ghast after consuming Lorraine's flesh and blood, there must be conditions for becoming a vampire. There was much they didn't know, but Lorraine promised to help. Then she grew serious, telling Ront to undress so she could examine his body with a magic tool, photographing every inch. She even wanted to cut a little to test pain and other crazy things. Lorraine claimed she had some common sense, so she decided to let Ront rest tonight before conducting insane experiments tomorrow. The next morning, Ront felt great. The strange urges from yesterday were gone, but he couldn't return to the labyrinth with a broken sword. Clope didn't believe Ront had already broken his sword and said he couldn't repair it. Ront explained the sword broke because he'd used holy power, but Clope said there were no enemies in the moon's reflection labyrinth that required it. Clope was shocked when Ront mentioned encountering a giant skeleton and discovering an unexplored area. Clope nearly said Ront's name but stopped himself, not wanting Ront to know he was aware of his identity. Ront wanted to explore that area, and Clope agreed he shouldn't let others go there first. The sword Ront had ordered wasn't ready, so Clope lent him one better than the first. Ront was impressed, but Clope said Ront was one of his best customers. After Ront left, Clope admitted he knew he couldn't deceive Ront, but he still gave him the sword. Ront returned home and saw that Loris's shop was bustling. Lorraine was combining mildly toxic ingredients to create a poison capable of killing a red grizzly. Ront watched, having agreed to assist with the experiment, but began questioning his decision. He drank the foul-tasting concoction, and Lorraine praised him as the first person to survive drinking it. Tests showed the poison had no effect on Ront, but healing potions and medicinal herbs were effective. Lorraine was exhausted, but Ront barely needed sleep. The problem was, he still had a faint craving for human flesh and blood. Lorraine surprised him by handing him a bottle of her own blood, enchanted with preservation magic to keep it from spoiling. She suggested Rond drink it regularly to prevent another loss of control. Rond hesitated but took a sip and found it delicious. A single drop was enough to suppress his cravings, and he planned to make the bottle last. Rond mentioned he was heading to the guild to pick up a job, but Lorraine reminded him he'd need to show ID. Rond figured no one would care if a bronze-ranked adventurer showed up in strange attire, but Lorraine pointed out that Rond was well-known and well-liked at the guild. He was always helping others and taking on undesirable jobs. There had even been talks of recruiting him to work at the guild, but they hadn't brought it up because Rond didn't seem ready to retire. They were right. Rond dreamed of becoming mithril class and had no plans to quit. To rank up, Rond needed to pass an exam, which required proving himself by taking on missions. But if the guild found out Rond was back, they'd have questions. Lorraine came up with a brilliant idea. Rond would pretend to be someone else. Rond went to the guild and registered as a new adventurer. Sheila Ebars handed him a form to fill out, and Rond was reminded of the last time he'd done this 10 years ago. Back then, he hadn't known what counted as a skill, only writing down his name and age. Despite the years, Rond's handwriting hadn't changed. A flashback showed Rond hesitating about the disguise, but Lorraine assured him it was the best way. No one would question the appearance of a wandering adventurer. However, he'd lose all his past achievements and start from iron rank. Rond didn't care, determined to reach mithril class no matter the cost. For some reason, Rond only changed his last name. Sheila noted that there was another adventurer named Rond who had recently gone missing. Rond claimed he knew about the other Rond because Lorraine had told him. He lied, saying he was Lorraine's relative and staying at her place. There had been rumors about a strange man coming and going from Lorraine's house, so Sheila was relieved to finally meet Rond. Rond was glad to spin this lie, not wanting weird rumors about Lorraine to spread. The name Rond was common, and no one questioned a wandering adventurer's appearance, so Rond was happy to start fresh. Sheila handed him his adventurer ID and told him not to die. Rond returned to the labyrinth and heard people fighting goblins. They sounded like kids, and he soon found them, a swordsman and a healer. They were clearly new adventurers but worked well together. Rond left them alone, knowing they'd be fine, and reflected that he couldn't guide newcomers like he used to. His appearance might just scare them now. Not wanting anyone else to discover the unexplored area, Rond hurried there. He planned to explore it so he could report it to the guild, which wouldn't just be valuable, it would be a major achievement for a new adventurer like Rond Vivier. Venturing deeper into the newly discovered area, Rond found himself in a strange room. A collapsed balcony stood there, and it seemed someone had been living inside the labyrinth. Before Rond could touch the flowers nearby, he was startled by a voice. Turning around, he saw a mysterious woman, referred to as the mysterious woman, who demanded to know what he was doing there. Rond sensed she brought bad news and explained he was just checking if anything was there. The woman accused him of theft, declaring that Rond was prepared to die there. She refused to forgive him, unwilling to let the place be disturbed. Rond braced for danger as the woman unleashed a powerful attack. His clothes were shredded, and he could barely stand. The woman was shocked by Rond's appearance but realized it explained his presence, admitting her mistake. She assumed Rond was angry about his burned clothes, but Rond was more upset about nearly being killed. The woman gave Rond her cloak and asked him to keep this special place a secret from the guild. She explained no one could enter except with Rond by their side. Confused by everything, Rond accepted, and the woman decided to give him something since adventurers disliked returning empty-handed. She handed him an ACAA map, but Rond saw it was blank. The woman explained it was a magical tool that automatically recorded the spaces its owner traversed. The transaction complete, she prepared to send Rond back to the entrance. She wished him good health, then realized that wasn't the best phrase for him, teleporting him away. Back home, Lorraine couldn't believe how many bizarre things happened to Rond. She confirmed the map was safe to use, though it didn't react to her magic. Instead, it responded to Rond, displaying a map of the moon's reflection labyrinth. There was a strange mark, the names Raiz Dunner and Laura Satie, the kids Rond had seen in the labyrinth, revealing that the map showed the names and positions of people inside. It was an incredible tool, and Lorraine considered it a national treasure. Rond could also switch it to other labyrinths he'd explored, though incomplete since it only showed places he'd been. Rond asked Lorraine to examine the cloak, but she said it likely wasn't cursed since Rond wore it without issue. The cloak had incredibly strong magical resistance and was impervious to swords, stronger than armor. Lorraine wondered who the woman was, clearly immensely powerful, at least gold class by Rond's current strength. Lorraine asked about the strange room, and Ront said he'd return to the labyrinth tomorrow. Lorraine reminded him he'd nearly been killed, but Ront pointed out the woman hadn't forbidden his return, only asked him not to tell the guild. Lorraine argued the woman clearly wanted to be left alone, but Ront planned to explain everything by talking to her. The next day, Ront returned to the labyrinth, pondering his situation as he fought skeletons. Most would pity him if they knew his circumstances, but Ront didn't see it that way. To him, he'd fought strong enemies, uncovered mysteries, and grown stronger, things a mithril-class adventurer would do. Ront found the entrance gone and realized the woman didn't want him back yet. But he was sure this wasn't over, thinking she just didn't want him visiting now. At the guild, a side character wondered where Ront was and hoped he was okay. Sheila Ebars recalled her first meeting with Ront and was startled when Ront Vivier appeared. Ront wanted to take a job collecting 3 orc meat carcasses. Orcs were formidable, so Sheila didn't recommend it for an iron-ranked adventurer. Ront knew it usually took a strong bronze-ranked adventurer to defeat one orc, but he claimed to have beaten orcs several times. Sheila trusted his judgment and told him to flee if it got too dangerous. Ront accepted the condition, admitting he only had one life, and reflecting that he understood that better than anyone. Ront returned after completing his first job as Ront Vivier, reflecting on how essential a magic bag was for a solo adventurer like himself. It had taken him 5 years to save up for the bag, but it was completely worth it. Ront had properly prepared and preserved the orc meat, making Sheila confident the client would be satisfied. The job was done, and word quickly spread about how swiftly Ront Vivier had single-handedly defeated 3 orcs. People began wondering who this iron-class rookie was, and Ront realized he might have stood out too much. Sheila returned, and Ront was surprised when his manager suggested he take a promotion exam. It was rare for anyone to get this opportunity so soon, but they believed Ront Vivier had potential. If he passed, he would become a bronze-class adventurer, so Ront accepted. Lorraine was happy to hear the good news, but Ront only praised his new body. Lorraine scolded him for belittling himself since he was the one controlling it. She was disappointed to hear Ront had used the name Vivier, her family name, as it could raise suspicions. Ront argued that a strange man going in and out of Lorraine's house would spark rumors, so it was better to pretend to be a relative. Lorraine accepted his reasoning but told him not to worry about her reputation. She was just a poor scholar who came to this town after failing in the capital and didn't care what others thought. Ront didn't want to burden Lorraine, but she pointed out that he was the one cooking, cleaning, and doing laundry, so she owed him more. Ront disagreed, saying he was still human thanks to her. Touched by his words, Lorraine offered to let Ront stay with her as long as he wanted, as she didn't mind the family being inconvenienced. Ront accepted her offer. The next day, Ront arrived at the guild for his exam. Sheila was surprised he came so soon, assuming he would wait for the next exam months later. But Ront didn't want to delay. A lazy adventurer arrived late after staying up all night watching anicapped videos, and Ront thought he would lose points. Adventurers who couldn't be punctual weren't trusted and might fail. The first part of the exam tested the adventurer's knowledge of guild rules and monster material handling. Only those who passed could proceed to the practical exam, which changed each time. Ront remembered his first exam, where the task was gathering plants. The written test began, and Ront recognized Laura Satie from the labyrinth, though her friend wasn't there likely taking the oral exam. Few people could read or write, so Ront was fortunate to have learned in his village. He had also studied everything needed for this test, so it should have been easy. Afterward, one examinee complained about how difficult it was, but Ront was told he had scored perfectly, an extremely rare feat. Ront was just glad he passed. Ront wondered what the practical exam would be, and Sheila explained he would form a party with other examinees to carry out a guild mission. Ront was grouped with Raiz Dunner and Laura Satie. Raiz introduced himself as a swordsman who used spirit energy to enhance his strength, while Laura was a witch capable of healing magic. The examinees were told their mission would take place in the New Moon Labyrinth, with the task of reaching a marked point on their map before sunset. The first party to arrive would receive a reward matching their efforts, making it clear this was a race. Raiz boasted about having been to the New Moon Labyrinth before, but Laura embarrassed him by pointing out they had only entered a small part of it. Raiz was shocked when Ront stopped them and suggested buying a map. They argued the guild had already provided one, but Ront said it was 15 years old and unreliable. They were stunned the guild would try to trick them, but Ront, who had faced death before, wasn't fooled. He went to buy a map. They couldn't afford a full map costing 2 silver coins, but Ront said they only needed the first floor. The merchant realized he couldn't swindle Ront and sold them a first floor map for 5 bronze coins. The updated map revealed more of the labyrinth, including trap locations. The merchant, recognizing Ront's experience, told the younger adventurers to listen to him. Laura asked why the guild gave them an outdated map, and Ront explained their carriage could have taken them to the wrong place. Adventurers couldn't afford to be careless, and this exam tested whether they were worthy. As soon as they entered the labyrinth, they encountered skeletons, and Ront warned the others to stay alert despite them being weak monsters. Raiz and Laura demonstrated their skills by destroying several skeletons, and Ront thought they were impressive for their age. They had clear roles, so they didn't hinder each other. Ront assisted Raiz slightly, and the battle ended. They noticed more monsters than usual, and Ront detected a scent attracting them, evidence of an ambush ahead. None of the monsters here should have such intelligence, but Laura was shocked when Ront said it wasn't a monster. Raiz refused to believe they would have to fight humans, so Ront took the lead. He blocked the initial attack, but Raiz wanted to face the first enemy. Ront impressed Raiz with his evasion skills before swiftly taking down the enemy archer and preventing their mage from casting. Laura aided Raiz with a blinding light spell, and Ront realized they didn't need his help. This became even clearer when the young duo demonstrated teamwork and defeated a bald man. Raiz explained the enemy was another examinee trying to make them fail. The examiner had said anything was allowed to win, and Ront reminded them monsters weren't the only threat. Adventurers couldn't afford to let their guard down, and Raiz declared they would follow Ront's orders from then on. As they left, Ront told a hidden figure to take out the trash, and the man was stunned. Ront knew he was there. The masked man remarked that Ront seemed aware they were sent by the guild, leaving them wondering who he was. The hidden man, Isaac Hart, suspected Ront's identity and thought his brother might have been right. At the guild, Sheila went to meet the cool guild master. As Ront Vivier's handler, Sheila was responsible for him, and the master wanted to discuss rumors that Ront was a fraud appearing suddenly with exceptional skills and no clear history. The master said every adventurer had a past, but they couldn't ignore the accusations, so he ordered Sheila to report anything she learned about Ront Vivier. Meanwhile, in the labyrinth, Ront's party neared their destination. Ahead was one of the floor's boss rooms, and the only way forward was through it. Raiz and Laura had never fought a boss before. It wasn't something two iron-class adventurers could handle. Raiz was offended when Ront asked if he was scared, but Ront said there was no shame in avoiding an unwinnable fight. Another party arrived, and Laura was surprised when Ront called this perfect timing. The rival party mocked them as weirdos, but Ront didn't like their tone. They crossed the line by targeting Laura, but Raiz defended her. When they kept provoking, Ront threatened them. They claimed it was just a joke, but Ront had no sense of humor. Their leader said they could go first, but Ront let them, wanting his team to rest. The rival party entered, boasting about how stupid Ront was for letting them go ahead. Raiz was frustrated, thinking this meant defeat, but Laura had learned not to doubt Rent. Raiz assumed Rent wanted them to observe the boss fight first, but there was more to it. Suddenly, they heard screams as the first party was dragged out of the room in pain. Rent explained guild staff had rescued the foolish party they lost, but at least they weren't dead. He wanted the younger two to see this so they'd feel more at ease, reiterating that avoiding an unwinnable fight wasn't wrong. Raiz realized if he ran now, he might never return, meaning he'd never become a true adventurer. He asked Laura if she was willing to fight, and she agreed. Rent concluded Raiz had finally made his decision. Adventurers who lost their spirit grew weak, and many quit, but Raiz recognized that feeling and chose not to flee. That was a crucial step in becoming an adventurer, so they entered the boss room. In the boss room, they faced a giant slime monster, the Grand Slime. Raiz vowed not to fail like the previous group. Ront thought things weren't going as he had hoped. Since defeating the boss wasn't actually required for the exam, he secretly wished another group would take it down. Deciding to go along with it, Ront followed as Raiz launched her attack. Her target was the slime's core, but her sword didn't penetrate deeply. With Raiz only able to dodge, Ront instructed Laura to focus on strengthening her magic. A flashback revealed their earlier planning for this battle. Ront had explained that physical attacks were ineffective against this monster, and they would have to rely on magic. Laura's powerful fire spell required time to prepare. Ront offered to block the slime's attacks, but Raiz insisted on doing it herself. Now, battered and bruised, Raiz was struggling, so Laura told Ront to help her instead of protecting her. The timing was perfect. Ront managed to save Raiz just in time. Working together, they pushed the slime back, and Laura announced she was ready. She unleashed her grand pyro flame, melting the slime with intense heat. They had to destroy the core before it regenerated. Raiz smashed it, and the young adventurers celebrated their victory. Raiz asked what Ront was doing, and he explained that slime fluid was highly valuable. Even after splitting it, each of them would earn at least 1 silver coin. While busy collecting the slime's mucus, the other group called them losers and rushed toward the exit. Raiz worried they had lost, but Laura reassured her. Ron knew Laura had already realized what he had. There was a sleeping gas trap ahead. People were most careless near the goal. It didn't matter, though, as Laura explained that reaching the exit first wasn't the point. She reminded Rise of the guild's instructions. They had never framed this as a race. The guild had made them think it was a competition, but it wasn't, which was why Ron had let the other group go ahead. A true adventurer's duty was to complete the mission before the deadline. Rise wished this had been explained more clearly, but Ron said a real adventurer had to think for themselves. Upon arriving at their destination, a man named Adele congratulated them for being first. The young trio had learned not to trust anything blindly and demanded proof of his affiliation with the guild. Adele confirmed it and handed them tokens. Once presented at the guild, they would officially become bronze-class adventurers. The top 3 teams also received a bonus, so they were given some potions. This part of the exam was over, but Ron wanted them to take a detour before heading back. He led them to the next floor, explaining that the labyrinth defied human understanding. Rise and Laura were confused, but it became clear when Ron brought them to a room that resembled a forest, somehow bathed in sunlight. He wanted to show them the kind of world they were stepping into. Though eager to explore, Ron reminded them the exam wasn't complete until they returned to the guild. Back at the guild, the exam officially concluded. Rise wondered if they were now bronze class, but Sheila interrupted with a report from Adele, who had overseen their test. Adele had said the exam also tested one's character. They couldn't promote someone unfit, but Ron's group had passed. They were now officially bronze class, and they celebrated. Ron thanked his new friends, but they knew it was thanks to him that they had become true adventurers. They wanted to keep journeying together, but Laura, perceptive as ever, knew that wasn't possible. She could tell Ron had a far different path ahead. The reason he had taught them so much during the exam was so they could stand on their own. They respected Ron as a comrade and hoped to adventure together again someday. After their farewells, Sheila said she had an important question for Ron and asked him to follow. She was sure he was smart enough to guess why, and Ron suspected Sheila knew his true identity. He wondered if the guild meant to punish him, but Sheila didn't answer. Ron considered never returning, but Sheila insisted she only wanted to know what had happened to him. Her worried tone made him agree. Ron revealed little, only saying he had faced something he didn't want to drag others into. Sheila surprised him by admitting she hadn't reported his true identity to the guild. She had only told the exam supervisor, her brother Isaac Hart, who could keep secrets. Skeptical, Ron demanded proof, so Sheila showed him a magic contract. If she violated its terms, she would be exiled from the guild and sold into slavery in a country where it was legal. Ron called it extreme, but Sheila wanted to prove her sincerity. When he asked why she'd go so far, Sheila said she simply wanted to help, not out of duty, but because Ron had once helped her. He reluctantly signed the contract, then removed his hood, revealing his undead face. Sheila was terrified, but she didn't regret asking. She'd rather know if Ron was suffering. Ron told her to think carefully about whether she could truly assist him. Sheila stopped him from leaving, saying she trusted him. His kindness toward Rise and Laura proved his character. She vowed to help however she could. Back at home, Lorraine was shocked when Ron brought Sheila inside. Sheila said Ron had told her everything, but Lorraine called them naive. Sheila had walked into the home of a witch and a monster. Jokingly, Lorraine quipped that Sheila might end up as their dinner, but her tone turned serious as she explained Ron's condition. The room fell silent, tension thick. Lorraine's gaze was cold, one wrong answer, and Sheila wouldn't leave alive. But Sheila calmly said she knew exactly what had happened to Ron and wasn't afraid. Relieved, they relaxed, sharing a meal, though Gordon's cooking was, as usual, terrible. Lorraine mentioned the small price of Ron's condition, and Sheila watched as he drank blood for the first time. Sheila then brought up another concern. Several rookie adventurers had gone missing, and the guild suspected kidnappings. Ron's high skills and suspicious demeanor had drawn rumors. Though flattered people were jealous, Lorraine warned him to lay low. He agreed to avoid the labyrinth for 4 days. The next day, Rise and Laura looked for new quests, eager to return to the labyrinth. The guild master remarked that Ron Vivier had passed the exam but wondered where the old Ron was. He planned to recruit him into the guild, and Sheila thought he'd be a great addition. Shortly afterward, Ron left the house, and Lorraine knew he was heading to the labyrinth, even though he was supposed to wait until the kidnapping rumors died down. She reminded herself that Ron was a man on a mission. Ron visited the blacksmith, Clope, to retrieve his sword and was satisfied with the result. Clope said it was easy because he knew Ron's movements, which made Ron even more certain that Clope knew his true identity. The new sword was exactly as Ron had requested, capable of channeling mana, spiritual energy, and sanctity. Ron tested the mana first, and Clope was shocked to see how much stronger he had become. Ront thought he was just infusing mana into the sword, but it was different from spiritual energy, which he could control to unleash powerful attacks. Finally, Ront used Sanctity, startling Clope once again as he obliterated a tree stump. The sword was remarkable because it remained completely undamaged even when infused with Sanctity. Ront's Sanctity even caused a few sprouts to grow, prompting Clope to ask how he could use such power. Ront explained that it happened when he repaired a temple, though he couldn't remember which god, probably a minor one. Wanting to practice more, Ront asked Clope to prepare a larger stump, saying he wanted to test all his abilities at once. Ront had never heard of mana-spirit fusion, so Clope explained that it was a technique that greatly enhanced magic and spiritual energy. However, only masters could use it, as failure could cause the body to explode. Undeterred, Ront decided to try it anyway, reasoning that an explosion wouldn't destroy his monstrous body. He used a practice sword since it would be cheaper to replace if it broke. Ront infused mana into the sword and spiritual energy into his hand. It was far more difficult than he expected, and he couldn't sustain it for long. When he unleashed the attack, it caused massive destruction. Clope warned that adding Sanctity to the mix would be too dangerous, but Ront was determined. Combining all three powers, Ront roared that he would become a Mithril-class adventurer no matter what. The area trembled as he struggled to control the fusion, and Clope knew this was trouble. The sword couldn't withstand the strain. When Ront released the attack, it shattered into fragments. Sanctity could purify impurities and return matter to its original state, meaning ordinary swords couldn't handle it, as the Sanctity would break their bonds. Clope's new sword could endure Sanctity, but not an attack like that. At most, Ront could only perform mana-spirit fusion. Worried that some enemies might be too strong for just that, Ront realized he couldn't afford an endless supply of swords. He concluded that he needed to earn a lot of money for better equipment. Suddenly, Ront noticed an annoyed man being pestered by a beggar for help. To get rid of the man, Ront pretended he was going to extort the beggar and bribed the man to leave. He then offered to hear the beggar's story. The beggar, Ryantis from Tatsu village, known for its strange festivals, told Ront a legend about a beautiful young girl with a mana-rich body who was sacrificed to the Lake Lord. The village held a yearly festival to commemorate her. But this year, the Lake Lord had actually appeared and devoured the girl playing the victim. Now, the Lord demanded more sacrifices, and several girls had already died. Ryantis begged Ront for help because his sister, Amiris, was to be the next sacrifice. Ront suspected Ryantis only wanted to save his sister and didn't necessarily intend to fight the Lake Lord, but he had a bad feeling about the situation. They arrived at the village, where Ryantis explained that everyone was stressed about the Lake Lord's demands. At Ryantis' house, a mark on the door indicated whose daughter was to be sacrificed. The Lake Lord itself didn't make the mark, it lived at the bottom of the lake and was never seen. The villagers believed Kelpies, powerful monsters serving the Lake Lord, made the marks, which surprised Ront. When Ryantis told Amiris that Ront was there to save her, she became furious, having always warned Ryantis to avoid strange people. Ryantis insisted he could trust Ront, but Amiris kept calling him a weirdo, hurting Ront's feelings which he heard clearly due to his sharp senses. Amiris explained that the festival was an ancient tradition, and she refused to be the only girl exempted. Ryantis was shocked, but Amiris told Ront to leave. Ront insisted he'd been hired by Ryantis, who swore he wouldn't back down. Amiris reluctantly allowed Ront to stay but declared she was proud to be a sacrifice. The festival was the next day, and it was clear Amiris wouldn't cooperate. Ront wondered what Ryantis' plan was, and the boy said he'd do anything to save his sister. The next morning, Ront tried asking villagers for information, but children ran away, fearing he'd eat them. A merchant assumed Ront was there for the festival but said his timing was bad. The Lake Lord was angry, terrifying the villagers and ruining business. At dinner, Ryantis called Ront over, and the merchant advised him to leave. Ryantis thought the merchant was kind for coming to the village, but Ront was suspicious. That night, Amiris was prepared for the sacrifice. The women helping her thought Ryantis would try to escape with her, but Amiris said the Lake Lord would destroy the village if she fled. She called her brother a fool but admitted she was worried for him. Ront wasn't allowed in Amiris' room, but he promised to handle everything and urged her to fight back. Amiris said no human could defeat the Lake Lord, but Ront swore he and Ryantis would succeed. He reminded her that she was Ryantis' only family and begged her not to give up. The ritual began, and the man in charge apologized to Amiris. She understood they were protecting the village but noticed the men escorting her were nervous. As they headed to the lake, Ryantis warned they should turn back if the fog grew too thick. Suddenly, Amiris' orb began glowing. A monster appeared, and she pleaded with it, offering herself to protect the village. Ront snatched the orb away, calling it a mere beacon. Shocking everyone, he walked on water thanks to Lorraine's magic tool and declared he would fight the Lake Lord. He quickly realized something was off. Krakens don't breathe fire and pierced through the monster, revealing a hidden ship. A sorcerer had been using illusions and fire spells to fake the Lake Lord's appearance. Disappointed, Ront mocked the ugly merchants, trying to scam the village and easily defeated them. Ryantis and Amiris arrived, stunned by the truth. The culprits had planned to sell the sacrificed girls, who were still alive in a hut on a small island. The village celebrated as they rescued the girls. Ryantis and Amiris begged Ront to stay for the festival, but he declined, saying he had urgent matters. As thanks, Amiris kissed him, which Ront happily accepted. Back home, Ront told Lorraine everything and thanked her for the magic tool that let him walk on water. Lorraine teased him for stealing another girl's heart, but Ront knew Amiris would forget him soon. Such was the life of an adventurer. Laughing, Lorraine joked that Ront deserved divine punishment. Then, Ront was disappointed to see a job that only paid 1 bronze coin. Sheila greeted him, and Ront said he wouldn't go to the labyrinth as promised. He was curious about the 1-coin mission, and Sheila explained it was a guild tradition. This mission was difficult, requiring the collection of dragon's blood flowers, which only grew in toxic swamps. There was a story behind it. A dragon fell in love with a human woman, and its blood turned into bright red flowers. Ront didn't particularly like the story, but Sheila said the girl who received the flower would be loved forever. This mission was requested by an orphanage to make medicine to save someone they loved. Ront decided to take the mission, surprising Sheila. Ront arrived at the Run Little orphanage, which was immediately falling apart. He repaired it with slime mucus, but scared the girl who greeted him, Elise. He said he was there for the mission, and Elise invited him inside as a collector of customs. Inside, Elise told the orphans to behave, but they had no parents to teach them. They crowded around Ront, asking why he looked strange. Elise warned that adventurers were dangerous barbarians, so they should stay away. She apologized for insulting Ront, but Ront agreed and told the children to keep their distance. He said the children seemed well behaved, showing good upbringing. Elise said it was thanks to Lillian, the head of the orphanage. Ront explained that dragon's blood flowers were hard to obtain, almost never available in shops, and very expensive. He wanted more information, but Elise made sure Ront would keep it a secret. Elise took him to meet Lillian, a priestess. Ront introduced himself, but Elise told Lillian that Ront was there to clean the storage room. In truth, Lillian had Maluma disease, which afflicted holy magic users. If a person's holiness wasn't strong enough, each use would cause evil energy to accumulate in their body. The only cures were a maiden's blood or medicine made from dragon's blood flowers. Lillian didn't know about her illness, and Elise kept it a secret because if she found out, Lillian would leave the orphanage and accept the disease as divine will. Elise was sure no one would take the mission, and she was prepared to become an adventurer to do it herself. Fortunately, Ront agreed to take the mission and promised to get the flower. Ront decided to clean the storage room first, and Elise insisted on joining. Monsters sometimes appeared there, so Ront gave her a knife just in case. They encountered monsters, resembling rats, and one bit Ront. Ront showed them who was boss but was confused when the rat changed color. He was shocked to realize what was happening, ordered the rat to run in circles, and Elise was stunned when it obeyed. Ront returned home and explained to Lorraine that Mickey Mouse had joined his party while exploring the orphanage's storage. Lorraine never expected to hear that sentence and explained that vampires had the power to create and control familiars. She had never tested what would happen if Ront gave his blood to a monster, but clearly, he now had this ability. Lorraine allowed Ront to keep the creature, but he had to pay rent by providing blood samples and information. Mickey Mouse bit Lorraine, and Ront decided to call it Blackie. Lorraine was disappointed by Ront's lack of creativity and named it Adele. The rat was happy with the name, and Ront said Adele was the leader of the rat pack. He couldn't speak rat language but somehow knew what it was thinking. That night, Ront reflected on how he no longer needed sleep since becoming undead. He was so obsessed with adventuring that he considered never leaving the labyrinth, but he realized people would grow suspicious if he never rested. The hours without rest were lonely, but Lorraine appeared. Ront was surprised to see her cooking and warned that the swamp he was heading to was extremely dangerous. He was going alone, so he didn't have to worry about poison, but Lorraine said there was a terrifying monster called a Terrorist. Even bronze-class adventurers needed a party to face one. Ront said he wouldn't fight it, as holy water could repel Terrorist, and he had bought some. Lorraine said it didn't always work, but Ront decided he'd figure it out if there was trouble. Ront was surprised to enjoy Lorraine's cooking, who revealed the secret ingredient was her own blood. Adele almost liked it as much as Ront, so Lorraine promised to make it again when Ront returned. Ront arrived at the swamp, glad the poison didn't affect Adele. The swamp was home to rare flora and fauna, and efforts had been made to make it traversable. Suddenly, Rond was attacked. He noted wild monsters were stronger than those in the labyrinth because they had to survive in the wild. But Rond was strong enough to easily defeat the goblin. He told Adele to fight next time. As he crossed the swamp, Rond thought being undead had advantages since he was immune to poison. If he could overcome his terrifying appearance, he might choose to remain undead forever. Rond fell off a bridge and was disappointed to see Adele only cared about saving itself. The situation turned dangerous as swamp monsters approached, but Rond easily defeated them. He couldn't let his guard down for a second and wondered why Adele was so lazy. At home, Lorraine served Sheila blood soup. Sheila was only told afterward, but Lorraine assured her portion contained no blood. Sheila said the guild knew about the Lake Lord incident. The villagers were grateful to the adventurer who helped but refused to tell the guild who it was. Sheila asked why Rond kept it a secret, and Lorraine guessed he didn't want his new name associated with the kidnapping. Sheila knew Lorraine knew a lot about Rond, so she asked why Rond was so determined to become a mithril-class adventurer. Oddly, Lorraine didn't know and said Rond never talked about it. Lorraine avoided asking too much, but Sheila asked how she wasn't worried, especially now that Rond might face a Tarisk. Lorraine said the guild only allowed adventurers to take missions they could handle, and she trusted their judgment. More importantly, she believed Rond would always find a way back. In the swamp, Rond was disappointed the holy water didn't work. He was chased by the Tarisk and reached a dead end. He had to fight the monster and started by deflecting its poison attacks. Fortunately, the poison didn't affect Rond, but he realized he couldn't defeat it with mana alone. He combined mana and spiritual energy for his next attack, but it barely damaged the Tarisk. The situation was dire, and Rond was shocked when Adele attacked heroically. His surprise grew when Adele seemed to use holy power, making Rond wonder if the little rat could wield such abilities. Adele was swallowed by the Tarisk, panicking Rond, but was soon spat out. Rond scolded Adele for using holy power without permission, but its heroics gave him an idea. Rond coated his sword with holy energy and closed in while dodging the Tarisk's vomit balls. He launched a powerful strike, but the Tarisk wasn't easily defeated. Rond pushed his sword deeper and finally slew it. Rond won and was pleased to realize holiness was the Tarisk's weakness. He thanked Adele but knew he couldn't butcher the monster here, it was too big, so he absorbed it into his magic bag. Rond reflected on how intense the battle was but praised Adele for showing him how to beat the Tarisk. The swamp had many rare treasures, so Rent planned to return another time. Suddenly, Rent was amazed to find an area full of dragon's blood flowers. The place seemed purified, and he concluded it was because of the flowers. He prepared to gather some but was startled when a mysterious man appeared. Later referred to as Isaac Hart in another context. The man couldn't believe someone else was here, and they stared at each other in silence. Rond was surprised to see the man alone in the dangerous swamp, but the man said he had a magic tool to neutralize poison, holy water to repel Tarisk, and an extremely accurate map. He was looking for dragon's blood flowers, but Rond was suspicious. The man finished gathering what he needed, and Rond asked if the person he was making the medicine for was very ill. The man said yes, and Rond wished for their recovery. The man then said he was lucky to meet Rond because he was looking for someone who could regularly collect dragon's blood flowers. He knew Rond was an adventurer, and Rond admitted he was bronze class. Rond expected the man to change his mind, but instead, the man, who introduced himself as Isaac, offered him a job and promised to introduce Rond to his mistress once the deal was finalized. Rond returned to town, and his transporter was amazed he had survived the swamp. Rond lied, saying he had hidden his face with a mask because he was actually a mithril-class adventurer. At the guild, he requested a butcher to process the giant monster. Sheila was shocked that Rond had defeated a Tarisk alone and told him to keep quiet. The monster not only yielded magic stones but could also be carved into various materials. Sheila took him to a butcher named Dario, who was stunned to hear they had brought a Tarisk. They put on masks, and Rond unloaded the Tarisk in the specialized butchering facility. Dario was impressed by its pristine condition, as it had no wounds, a rare sight since Tarisk were usually fought from a distance, damaging their shells. Dario realized Rond had defeated it in a single strike, but Rond was very humble about it. Sheila Ebars was astonished, and Dario explained that he hadn't seen a Tarisk of this quality in a long time. It would fetch a high price, and Dario agreed to handle everything. Afterward, Sheila realized Rond was far stronger than she thought and wondered if he might already be silver class. When alone, Rond struggled to acknowledge his own strength. He compared himself to Isaac Hart, whom he believed must have gold class level power despite not being an adventurer. Rond attributed his strength solely to his undead body, which he had gained after becoming a monster. He wanted to become human again but wondered if he would lose that power. In the past, he had never been able to improve no matter how hard he tried. He doubted whether he could return to that state and how it would affect his dream of becoming a mithril-class adventurer. Ront went to the Run Little orphanage to fix the door again. Elise was surprised to hear Ront had already completed the mission. A man named Norman couldn't believe how perfectly the dragon's blood flowers had been prepared. Ront said only high-ranking adventurers could go to that swamp, so they would know how to handle the plants. Norman, an herbalist, explained that the swamp was extremely dangerous, and even high-level adventurers struggled to properly harvest the flowers. Umberto, the healer, prepared to make medicine for Lillian and said he would preserve the remaining flowers since many desperately needed the remedy. Ront revealed he had more flowers but didn't ask for payment, he only wanted Norman to use them well. They told him the flowers were extremely valuable, but Ront felt helping people was enough. Nearby, Adele met with his squad, and they all saluted. Elise officially announced the mission's completion and thanked Ront. She admitted she couldn't have done it alone but wanted to become an adventurer like Ront, who helped others. She thought she couldn't assist Ront in return, but Ront said there might come a time when he needed her help and would ask then. Adele returned, and Ront told Elise she didn't need to worry about the monster in the warehouse anymore since Adele had spoken to his old gang to protect her. Elise asked if she could tame monsters like Ront, and Ront told her to start training now. Unfortunately, training required money, but Ront said he had a friend who could help. Elise refused, not wanting to rely too much on others, so Ront lent her money on the condition that she repay him once she became a successful adventurer. Elise promised to pay him back with interest, and they agreed. That night, Lorraine agreed to train Elise since she didn't have much to do in her free time. Ront was glad Lorraine was helping, as he had no experience with young girls. Lorraine joked that Ront knew one young girl very well, but Ront said he didn't see her anywhere. Lorraine took offense and threatened to demonstrate a newly developed super powerful spell. Ront hurriedly apologized, saying he knew Lorraine was a young girl and complimented her youthful beauty. Lorraine finally calmed down but got annoyed again when she asked if Ront said that to every girl. Ront reassured her, saying he only spoke what he truly thought. Lorraine's mood shifted, and she went to get more food for Ront. The next morning, Ront went to the guild, where Sheila urgently needed to speak with him. There was a job request from the Latoul family specifically asking for Ront, but he didn't know who they were. Upon seeing the job details, Ront realized it was from Isaac. He wasn't sure what was going on but guessed Isaac was a servant of the Latoul family. Sheila didn't know much about them, only that they were an old family with great influence in Malt City, extremely secretive. Every guild master was warned never to offend the Latoul family. This was serious, and Sheila said Ront couldn't refuse their request. Ront had no intention of refusing, but Sheila worried they might take his life if they discovered he was a monster. Ront was confident he'd be fine since Isaac hadn't cared about his appearance when they met. At the orphanage, Norman told Lillian he had Maluma. Lillian suggested the church replace him, but they said they had already prepared the medicine. Lillian refused to take it, knowing how expensive it was, but Elise pleaded. Lillian was shocked to hear the dragon's blood flowers had been obtained by an adventurer for just 1 bronze coin. Lillian agreed to take the medicine and realized the adventurer was Ront. Ront arrived at the Latoul estate, and the guards allowed him to meet Isaac. Ront said he was there for the job, but the guard told him he first had to navigate a labyrinth outside the gate, maps wouldn't help. The garden was created with a special magic tool, and its paths constantly shifted. The head of the Latoul family had always collected magic tools, and the one who made the garden was among them. Ront hesitated, feeling like he was being dragged into their hobby, but the guard said there was a reward for completing the labyrinth, a magic tool from the family head. Ront knew the guard had cleared the labyrinth before, so he asked for advice. The guard gave only one hint: the sun won't help. Ront didn't understand but entered anyway. He thought his mask was a magic tool and would be happy to get another since they were valuable. He needed a lot of money and equipment to reach Mithril class. Ront explored the labyrinth but only wandered aimlessly. He took out his ACAA map, but it didn't work since this wasn't a true labyrinth. Fortunately, Ront had a good sense of direction and decided to create a mental map, which should have been enough for a small maze. However, time passed, and Ront realized he was lost. His usually reliable sense of direction failed him. He recalled the guard's advice that adventurers must be able to navigate without the sun, but if his mental map was correct, he should have already exited. Suddenly, Ront found a new area, but not the exit. Instead, he encountered a girl whom he assumed to be a daughter of the Latoul family. She remarked that he seemed unwilling to give up. The girl suggested they rest and have tea together. Ron noticed the teapot she used was a magical artifact. He pointed out that she hadn't used any tea leaves, and the girl explained that the enchanted teapot could recreate the flavor of any tea ever brewed. There were two types of magical artifacts, those discovered in labyrinths and those crafted by artisans to mimic them. This teapot had been found 200 years ago and was worth 300 platinum coins. Ron was stunned, thinking that a person could live comfortably for a lifetime on just 1 platinum and still have leftovers. The girl argued it was worth it because adventurers risked their lives to uncover such treasures. She then noticed Ron's shape-shifting mask, and he confirmed it was also a magical tool. He recalled a mysterious woman had sold it to him for 3 bronze coins. The Latoul girl asked if he'd be willing to sell it, given its immense value, but Ron refused. The mask concealed his undead identity. She apologized, and Ron thanked her for the best tea he'd ever tasted. Before he left, she gave him a clue: avoid looking at the sun. As Ron departed, the girl sighed. Ignoring her warning, Ron stared directly at the sun, only for it to vanish. He used a stone to confirm the presence of a teleportation trap. Hours passed as he remained lost, growing increasingly desperate. Finally, he escaped. The girl, who introduced herself as Laura Latoul, head of the Latoul family, congratulated him on solving the labyrinth's secret. Ron credited her advice. He was surprised that this petite girl led the family but explained he was here for work. Laura praised him, as few could complete the labyrinth, and led him to choose a reward, a magical artifact from the Latoul collection. Jokingly, Ron asked for an artifact that created labyrinths, but Laura refused. He retorted that this was payback for making him go through the maze. She explained that man-made artifacts were more consistent, though humans could only craft simple ones, like lamps. Entering the artifact storage, Ron was awed by the vast collection. Laura admitted no one knew why labyrinths existed or where the artifacts came from, some were even useless junk. She showed him a ball that bounced endlessly without purpose. When Ron asked why she collected these, Laura simply said she wanted them. Another item was a model airship that could be controlled. Ron enjoyed playing with it, torn between childish desire and practicality. Suddenly, Laura told him to focus on the model, and his consciousness was transported inside it. The experience was incredible but mana-intensive. Laura explained that real airships were modeled after this artifact, though no one understood how it worked. Ron considered its scouting potential but hesitated due to the mana cost. He decided to choose later and stumbled upon an artifact that lit up when something approached. Pressing a button on a normal-looking picture, he accidentally summoned a horde of monsters. Laura panicked as a giant golem formed, and Ron barely dodged its attacks. He realized a single hit would be fatal. Laura ordered Isaac to fetch the deactivation tool. Ron evaded the golem's relentless strikes, noting how it absorbed inorganic matter to grow stronger. Laura permitted him to damage it but doubted he could win. Ron managed to sever its arm, then recalled Lorraine's lesson that golems had a truth rune on their foreheads. Adding a stroke turned it into death, destroying them. Unfortunately, this golem bore no such rune. With no other options, Ron prepared to use Mana Spirit Fusion, a technique he wished to keep hidden. Just as the golem launched a devastating attack, Laura stopped it with Isaac's help. Isaac apologized for the delay, and Ron worried about compensation, but Laura simply instructed the servants to clean up. Continuing his search, Ron found monster-derived materials rather than artifacts, useful for potions and weapons. Then, an unbearable thirst overcame him as he spotted a vial of vampire blood, rumored to turn its drinker into a vampire. In truth, it either drove them mad, killed them, or left them as empty husks. No one claimed vampirism, as they'd be hunted down. Yet, the blood remained highly sought after by immortality seekers. Ron's body craved it, and he declared his decision. Back home, he revealed he'd chosen the airship. Lorraine admired its capabilities, but Ron saw it as a fun toy. He couldn't believe the Latoul's generosity, giving him 2 artifacts beyond his job's payment. Isaac deemed it fair, as Ron's work allowed him to focus on caring for Laura. At Latoul Castle, Isaac used dragon's blood flowers to prepare Laura's medicine. She was delighted by rare guests like Ron but needed rest after her excitement. Meanwhile, Ron confessed to Lorraine that the vampire blood was genuine. He'd felt its power and knew it would change him. Lorraine, fearful, reminded him that all who drank it met terrible ends. She admitted she rarely saw him hesitate. He confessed he was scared. But Ron knew he needed it to evolve, his body demanded it. Lorraine pleaded with him, arguing that even if his undead body survived, his mind might not. She'd rather he stay an undead adventurer with her forever. But she knew his true goal, to become a mithril-class adventurer, no matter how long it took. As Ron's eyes glowed red, he weighed his choice carefully. Lorraine remembered something Sheila had said but refused to tell Ron. She insisted, and it turned out to be a question: why did Ront want to become a mithril-class adventurer? Lorraine was shocked because Ront had never told her. She was offended that Ront didn't seem to care and told him to just drink the blood. Ront said Lorraine was overreacting, reminding her that she had once said it was wrong to ask about an adventurer's identity or past. That was back then, but Lorraine remembered and decided not to ask again. Ront said his story wasn't interesting, but Lorraine was stunned when Ront revealed it was for revenge. It was more complicated than that. He wanted to become someone who could prevent tragedies. Ront began recounting the story of the village where he grew up, far from the city. His father would shop for the entire village. When he was 5, his parents took him outside the village along with a girl named Jinline, who was excited to see the city. Ront was afraid of bandits, and Jinline called him a coward, saying he could never become an adventurer if he was always scared. Ront didn't know what an adventurer was, but Jinline told him to keep quiet so their parents wouldn't hear. Jinline talked about the beautiful things in the world and wanted to become an adventurer. Ront thought it was dangerous, but Jinline promised to grow strong enough to protect him. Jinline got Ront into trouble by running around the city, but Ront found it fun. Unfortunately, the story took a dark turn. On their way back, they were ambushed. Ront's parents and Jinline were severely injured, and Jinline shielded Ront. Ront felt terrible leaving their parents behind, but the children knew they were the only survivors. Just when they thought they had escaped, the wolf reappeared, and Ront suspected it was toying with them. The wolf was about to finish Ront off, but Jinline sacrificed herself to save him. Ront couldn't believe it, but Jinline reminded him of her promise to protect him and told Ront to grow strong before she died. The wolf was about to kill Ront, but a mysterious man, Wilfried, appeared and saved him. He told Ront to step back and fought the ferocious wolf. The battle was intense, but Will dealt serious damage and said the fight wouldn't end well if it continued, so the wolf fled. Will checked on Ront, but Ront was furious that he had arrived too late. Will apologized, but it wasn't enough for Ront, who screamed in grief. Will carried all the bodies back to the village, and Ront asked how to become an adventurer. Will hesitated, but Ront said he wanted to become one to fulfill Jinline's wish. Ront was too young to register at the guild, so Will told him to train hard for 10 years, becoming strong enough to fight monsters and learn extensively. Will gave him a detailed list of things to study and suggested asking the villagers to teach him. This was extraordinary for Ront, as most adults would have just wished him luck. Will said the training was just the beginning and how far Ront went depended on his effort. He introduced himself as Wilfried, a mithril-class adventurer, and told Ront to find him once he became an adventurer, with one final piece of advice: don't die before achieving his goal. Lorraine was amazed by Ront's story, as the chance of being saved by a mithril-class adventurer was as rare as finding a dragon. Ront always held onto those memories and credited Will for many things. Will knew that without a purpose, Ront would lack the will to live, so he strongly encouraged him. Ront swore that once he became a mithril-class adventurer, he would defeat the monster that took everything he loved. He admitted he was afraid of death, but giving up was just as bad as dying. Lorraine knew Ront was ready to drink the vampire blood but joked that she'd bury his bones if he failed. Ront knew she was joking but said if he lost control, she should burn him to ashes. The mood turned serious, and Lorraine hoped it wouldn't come to that. Ront drank all the blood, and at first, he seemed fine. Lorraine was relieved, thinking the blood might have been fake, but she was shocked when Ront suddenly screamed in excruciating pain.
Hey! Ren, what's wrong? Get control of yourself! Rent!
What is this sensation? My body! I've got to hold on! Don't lose yourself!
She begged him to stay in control, but Ront vomited and writhed in agony. Inside, Ront felt his body being reshaped. Fangs and wings grew, and he feared he was turning into a terrifying monster. Panicking, he heard Lorraine calling his name, reminding him of his dreams and goals, pleading for him to come back. Her words reached him, and he resisted the transformation. Meanwhile, in the city, Clope was forging another sword for Ront. His wife reminded him that he had already given Ront a sword, but Clope said Ront was growing stronger and needed a suitable weapon. At the orphanage, Elise practiced her moves and was delighted to hear Lillian had improved greatly. Lillian thanked her, but Elise said it wasn't just her effort. At the guild, the young adventurers Ront had helped arrived, eager for their next mission. Sheila saw them and was reminded of Ront when they spoke of his teachings. Sheila warned them to be careful, and they reminded each other that adventurers must never let their guard down. Rena Rupage also recalled Ront's lessons, declaring that everyone only had one life to live. Back with Ront Faina, he woke up in a strange place. He wanted to sleep again and realized it had been so long since he had felt drowsy since becoming undead. Ront felt his body was hollow, even his heart, but with each evolution, he gained organs, skin, and more. However, there was also pain, as the fear of becoming something other than himself was overwhelming. Ront laughed now, realizing he had only endured because of his immortality. He woke up at home, and Lorraine Vivy explained she had been reading about vampires. According to the book, vampires had a ranking system, starting from mist, low vampires, mid-tier vampires, up to the most powerful, grand vampires. The stronger they were, the rarer and harder to classify. Ront asked why Lorraine was reading that, and she revealed that Ront had evolved again. What he truly was remained unclear, so Lorraine examined his body. Both were shocked to see Ront now had wings that could even change size. Lorraine still couldn't determine what he was but was sure Ront was far stronger, possibly still a weak vampire type, though she had never heard of a winged vampire. Next, they examined Ront's face. Removing his mask revealed fangs, confirming he was a vampire. His eyes were now blood red, but thankfully, some humans also had red eyes, so it wouldn't reveal his identity. Lorraine wasn't too worried about that, she was more focused on seeing Ront's real face again. She had waited a long time to say this to his true face and welcomed him home. Ront was surprised but finally relaxed, agreeing that this was indeed his home. Some time later, Lorraine asked if Ront had ever searched for Wilfred. Ront said he couldn't find him and suspected Wilfred was in another country. It was dangerous for a bronze-class adventurer to travel alone, and part of him didn't want to search until he felt more worthy. But now that Ront was a powerful vampire, he decided he could resume the search. Lorraine knew Ront was still the same and told him to go if he wanted, since he never listened to her advice anyway. But she didn't.